So welcome everybody to this webinar, Heat Pumps for Homeowners, which is brought to you by CAFS and supported by South Lakeland District Council. We'll start with some introductions. So I am Molly Hogg, I'm from CAFS and I'm just your host for today. We've also got Jessica Scott, who has led on the research work that we've done with homeowners about their heat pump experiences, and she's going to be sharing the findings of that research with you. We've also got two of the homeowners who participated in that research, Hugh Dixon and Mark Applin. Hugh has actually installed a heat pump, so he can share his experience of the heat pump with you. Mark decided against, so he'll share with us the reasons why he decided not to. And then finally, we are going to be joined by David Hill from Carbon Legacy. David is a heat pump installer, and he's here to tell you about all the types of issues to consider when thinking about a heat pump installation. We've also got Tina Holt from our energy team at CAFS. She won't be speaking, but she's on hand to answer any of your questions. So looking at the agenda now, following this slide, that'll be the end of the introduction, and I'm going to launch the first poll. It's quite easy. If you haven't done it before, it's very easy to fill in. You just click the dot for your answer. As soon as that's done, we're going to move over to Jessica, who will be delivering her presentation on the research findings. And then we'll hear from Hugh and then Mark. About 7:15, we'll be handing over to David, who will be telling us about the issues, the heat pump issues. That'll be about 20 minutes. And then just after 7:30, it'll be back to me to wrap up. And we'll have a final poll, some follow-up actions that you can take away with you after this webinar. And then we'll have the Q&A session, which will be about 20 minutes. So I am now going to launch poll 1. I'm going to stop sharing to be able to do that. And okay, so that's poll 2. So it's just one question on poll 1, and I'm launching it now. So the question is, how confident are you in making the right decision about whether a heat pump is suitable for your home? Okay, nearly half people responded now. Nearly everybody. The last people. Okay, 5 more seconds to do the poll if you want to. Okay, great. That was most of the people, most of the attendees, and I'm going to share the results with you now. So hopefully you can now view those results. So more than half of you aren't confident at all. So hopefully this webinar will help improve your confidence in your decision making, but we'll repeat this poll at the end to see whether or not we've achieved that aim. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jessica Scott for her presentation.
Oh, sorry. So it's the first question. There we go. So hello, my name is Jessica Scott, and I've been working as a volunteer for CAFS for the past 6 months on this heat pump report. I've just graduated from the University of Salford doing environmental management, so I've thoroughly enjoyed being part of this team and working towards learning some more about sustainability. So the introduction towards this report. The aims of this research was to gather information and the views from Cumbrian householders who have considered or considered having a heat pump installed, as well as people who have got a heat pump installed and have experienced this. From gathering this information, we will be able to understand what makes a successful heat pump installation and the benefits that it can provide for people. Also, I would like to understand what can lead to an unsuccessful installation of a heat pump and how we can avoid this more in the future. So the way we did this was we did questionnaires and interviews across people in Cumbria. So we got a total of 134 questionnaires through Smart Survey and 17 interviews from the people who wish to contribute their ideas further. So the interviews we got were 3 different groups. This looked at people who installed heat pumps, those who decided against having a heat pump, and those who are still considering having a heat pump and would like to know some more information. So going on to the questionnaires, the first question was, which district in Cumbria do you live? The top areas which we found were both the Eden and the South Lakeland district areas. The second question looked at what is your existing heating system for the people who participated, and that included gas central heating being the most popular, along with oil central heating and an air source heat pump. The next question, question 3, looked at if you had a heat pump, what are your thoughts? So this is where the findings started to merge together and we got our main themes that we'd found. So the first one that we got the example of was an air source heat pump, which cost £12,000. The participant found that it wasn't effective at all and that spent far too much money on trying to make their property warmer by having this heat pump installed. The second example looked at someone who was not connected to mains gas line, so they had to resort in using a different type of renewable energy to heat their homes. So they chose an external heat pump with underfloor heating. The system actually cost them more to run than having both a combi boiler and running it with a combi boiler itself. Now, the third example we got, which was most successful, was an air source heat pump, which was installed in a virtually airtight property, which was at passive house standards. This participant wished that more people could adopt these measures in new homes and new builds, as it cost a fraction of the price of old heating bills to run. Question 4. This looked at people's current heating systems and whether it meets their household needs. So 70 people said that it did meet their household needs. However, it met their heating requirements, but it didn't meet their sustainability requirements. So they were open to try out new heating systems, which were more renewable and energy efficient. People also mentioned that it partially met their heating needs or not at all. For these people, they found that their houses were inefficient, old, and it cost an awful lot of money to keep their houses warm, of which wasn't really sustainable. So what they found doing was heating certain rooms such as kitchen, living room or bedrooms rather than the whole house, which would save them money. Question 5. This looked at, have you ever considered a heat pump or consider one? This looked at both the positives and the negatives of heat pumps. So it's been found that having a heat pump would give a more sustainable system that is less reliant on fossil fuels and would reduce your household energy bills. However, the participants found that there was quite a few negatives that they'd experienced or heard of, and this included having to improve their dwelling shell to make sure the heat pump ran more efficiently. This would cost, as well as installing the heat pump itself, have additional costs on retrofitting retrofitting to make it more efficient. There was also a lot of concerns as to how efficient the heat pump may be in colder months and how this could be overcome. Question 6. What type of heat pump would you choose? So the majority of people ended up choosing air source heat pump. This is because it was the cheapest and less destructive heat pump that there was. The next one was ground source heat pump. I think less people chose this one was because it was more expensive to have a ground source heat pump compared to an air source. Also, a lot of people don't have the garden space to facilitate a ground source heat pump. Water source heat pump was the least popular option, whereupon people didn't have a water source to use for this, as well as if they did have a water source, the flow throughout the year wouldn't be strong enough to make sense to have a heat pump installed to compensate with it. Question 7, how much would you pay? So the majority of people would like to pay less than £10,000 and preferably less than £5,000. This was through using schemes such as the RHI and the Green Homes Grant. This would reduce people's cost of installing the heat pump, as well as counteracting a bit with any other measures such as installation that might be needed as well. Question 8, are you aware of anyone who has installed a heat pump in Cumbria? So this question didn't get much of a response, so we got 2 quite good examples of what people mentioned which made a good heat system. Air source works well in an insulated house with underfloor heating, especially passive style houses and new builds. Likewise, some need to spend more on current insulation levels, and it is a very case-to-case scenario. Question 9. What are the top 3 most important benefits of a heat pump? So it can be clear to see here from the results that people have found that having a heat pump will lower your carbon emissions and reduce your energy bills. Other measures looked at having a long lifetime expectancy for the heat pump, to be able to earn money through renewable payment schemes, and they're easy to maintain. The least popular method was to provide cooling during summer months when it was warmer. So I think the priority for people within Cumbria is to have heating during the colder months rather than providing cooling during the summer, because it's not that warm in Cumbria. So question 10 led on to the limitations of the heat pump. People have found that there is a high setup cost with having a heat pump installed, as well as the required the house be better insulated than it is now, having a higher cost. Also to have difficulty to install the heat pump, disruption to the household and neighbours, as well as potential planning permission and the use of electricity, making that it's not completely a renewable energy source. Question 11, awareness of grants and schemes available. So the top main grants that were available that people were aware of was the RHI, the Green Homes Grant, and the least 2 common ones that people didn't really mention much of was the Energy Company Obligation and the Clean Heat Grant, which isn't available until 2022. This leads on to the interviews. So the first interview that we looked at was those that had had heat pumps installed. The people found that the benefits that were provided by having a heat pump was that it provided a consistent heat throughout the day. This is compared to having like a central heating system where you'd have hot air in the morning for a couple of hours and in the evening, which wasn't consistent at all. So if the heat pump's done properly, you can have warm, even temperatures, even throughout colder temperature climates and in colder months. It will also reduce your energy bills and make you less reliant on non-renewable energies. Things, however, to consider to make sure that your system works efficiently and you can get the most from it would be to make sure your house is airtight, the possibility of having solar panels, having a good installer install your heat pump, and the potential for better insulation levels, possibility of underfloor heating and better glazing. Interviews for those that had considered having a heat pump but didn't think it was suitable for their property had mentioned that it could possibly benefit those of having a new build or properties which are more efficient in the first place. Having this and having a grant available to them would make it more cost effective, and they believe that this would work better. However, they'd found that the limitations with heat pumps are that there is a significant amount of work that needs to be carried out before installing the heat pump, and it may not be suitable for some large, older farmhouses that we have in Cumbria. And the grants do not always prioritise initial energy measures and efficiencies that need to be taken place first. And there could be the possible risk of Legionella. And the last interview that we looked at was those that do not have a heat pump but wish to. They believe that the benefits provided would be lowering carbon emissions, making people less dependent on fossil fuels and protecting future generations. Also, having a heat pump installed within your house would add value to your property. Things have them to consider would be what grants are available to them, how well is your house insulated, and would there be any additional cost for retrofitting, and how much money could be saved further. And I believe we go on to the conclusions to summarise everything. So, what contributes to an unsuccessful installation? A lot of people feel pressured or rushed into installing a heat pump, especially from when there's like a grant considered, which rushes people in before fully understanding, doing the research beforehand. So this leads to the heat pump not working efficiently. Likewise, having poor insulation and drafty buildings not improved to match the output of the heat pump. And as well as taking advice from companies who are trying to sell a product, which leads to a biased opinion and lacking the overall picture. So some steps can be missed out, which makes the heat pump not work efficiently. As well as using an installer who installs heat pumps where the system is not suitable or where the heat pump size is not sized up correctly. And what contributes to a successful installation? There needs to be better information available to householders through the internet sources, more reliable information, as well as more case studies showing heat pumps, both good and bad, professional independent advice before installing your heat pump, government incentives for those who install heat pumps to be able to remove those who aren't fully aware and poor quality installers, as well as simpler grants for those wishing to install a heat pump. This looks at covering more upfront costs for those of a lower income household who are not eligible for the full cover of the grants, however, do not have enough money to pay for the whole thing themselves. So that's the end of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. That was great. And Jessica's the report will be okay, Jessica. Great. Jessica's report will be available on our website, and I think we can possibly email it out to you if you want a copy. So I'll move on to Mark, if that's okay.
Okay, Molly, can you just confirm you can see my slides now?
Yes, can see it.
Okay, good. Well, hello everybody. Right, excellent. So a little bit about me. I have worked in, I work as a boat builder at the moment, but I have worked in construction, and my specialism was looking at particularly the cost control of mechanical and electrical systems. So I used to know quite a lot about renewable energy and mechanical electrical systems in buildings and those sorts of things. And although I don't work in that field anymore, I've still retained an interest in those areas. Okay, and I thought I'd talk about why I responded to the survey. Just to repeat, I'm interested in the area, and I'm in that concerned group, I guess, that was identified in the survey. I'm not sure whether heat pumps are the right solution for me, and I'm also not sure they're the right solution in Cumbria. So I think it's important that part of the work of this survey is trying to get to the bottom of those questions and get some really good answers about how well they can work for people in Cumbria. Okay, I'm going to talk briefly about two projects that I've been involved with. So one was in Knock. We got as far as getting planning permission for a new build on a derelict farm site in Knock. Knock's above the Eden Valley, typical Cumbrian site, you might say, in many ways, quite high in altitude and quite exposed. And in addition to my knowledge I had already, we ended up doing quite a lot of design research, and I've just highlighted here some of the things I found interesting and useful. So I read a lot of magazines, subscribed to some magazines, went to some shows, went on some CAF's open days, looking at people who had installed renewable energy heating systems. I did quite a few passive house visits over in the northeast, which were run by the Green Building Store. They're a really good resource on, hopefully they'll be doing visits, but there's lots of case studies on their websites and they sell lots of stuff. And I did a lot of reading, looked at a lot of stuff online and so on. And this is what we ended up building, or sorry, we ended up getting planning permission for, we didn't build it. So what was the bullet points, if you like, of what we ended up designing? So we designed a highly insulated and highly airtight house. We didn't actually make a decision as to whether we were going to build entirely to passive house standards and whether we were going to go through the certification process. But as part of that, we had solar PVs on the roof and solar hot water and mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, which is something that's already come out in the survey. And that gives you a minimal heat load. And we were going to meet the minimal heat load by having a small wood burner with an external air supply, which is one of the passive house requirements. And we're going to meet our remaining heat load, which might be a little bit of heating when we weren't using the wood burner, and some of our hot water load that wasn't met by installing a gas condensing boiler that would run on bottle gas because there's no main gas in Knock. Okay. Project 2 is our, if you like, our current house. It's a 70s house with cavity walls on a north-facing site in Cumbria, and it's even higher at 260 metres. So another cold and windy Cumbrian site. And one of the things you can see here, which has been mentioned already, is that our roof insulation isn't particularly good. So there's part of the roof, this is actually above the stairs, which is looking reasonably well insulated, although it might just be cold. And then the remainder of the roof is a habitable loft space. And it looks like the heating's on in there at the moment. It's melted most of the snow over that bit of roof, which isn't a sign of particularly good roof insulation. Okay. Shortly after we moved in, we needed to replace the boiler because the boiler turned out to fill the kitchen with smoke and was dangerous. And we didn't have a lot of money. We had a bit of a think about biomass, but we've got plenty of biomass available, but we didn't have any wood chips available, and plumbing in biomass was going to be very difficult. So what we ended up deciding to do, we went for the lowest cost, but a considerable increase in efficiency option, which was to install a condensing external boiler fired by oil. It gave us some more space in the kitchen, and basically it was plugged direct into the existing heating system. So changing the tails on the existing heating system was the only requirement. And if I just go back quickly, I think it's grey box on the outside of the house there is the boiler. Okay. So I thought I'd mention what my priorities would be to improve the existing house, because I've already identified, obviously, the roof is pretty leaky. So that would be the first thing. I would want to insulate the roof and the loft space and improve on that, as I think that's a major source of heat loss for our house. I also think the existing windows, whilst double glazed, well, I know the existing windows are whilst double glazed, some of that double glazing is old enough to be failing, and they are extremely leaky. You can have a conversation with someone outside the kitchen window without opening it. So they're clearly not very efficient. Then a larger step would be to think about doing external or internal wall insulation. I should mention there's already a little bit of insulation in the cavities. And then possibly going down the mechanical ventilation with heat recovery route. And I suppose with both those projects, one of the things I would talk about is trying to take a whole house approach to things. So I think it can be a mistake to get too involved in one specific technology. So, you can get really interested in biomass boilers, or you can get really interested in heat pumps, you can get really interested in triple glazed windows. But I think it's really important, I think this is reflected in Jessica's survey results, that you look at your house as a whole thing, and if you like, try and pick off the low-hanging fruit first, and maybe come up with a bit of a long-term plan as to how you're going to improve your whole experience of living in your house. But we are talking about heat pumps, so my questions are very similar to the ones that have come out of the survey. So how well do they perform in an environment like Cumbria, where external temperatures are quite low? Will you always need to increase the size of your radiators and install or underfloor heating to cope with the relatively low output temperatures from a heat pump? As reflected in the survey, they seem quite expensive, and ground source heat pumps, which I understand are more efficient than air source heat pumps, seem very, very expensive. And this was also mentioned by someone, the Legionella risk. I mean, I understand the Legionella isn't a risk, but what the heat pump needs to do is to raise the temperature of your domestic hot water to, I think, 65 degrees to once a week to kill the Legionella bacteria. And that's something that the heat pump is producing energy less effectively to do. Okay, thank you very much. I'll stop sharing. Oh yeah, sorry, one more question. Is increased insulation always a better option? Or perhaps I might be asking there, is increased insulation always part of a heat pump solution? Another thing I would say is I think I could ask 5 or 6 questions about any other renewable energy source as well. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thanks for stepping into that slot a bit early there. I've just received Hugh's slides, so I'm now going to hand over to Hugh, who has had a heat pump installed. So over to you, Hugh.
Right, yes, hello. So I thought I'd just show you some photographs because most of you won't know what all of this looks like. I took over this 1979 bungalow about 11 years ago, and it was incredibly poorly insulated. The windows leaked like crazy. I mean, drafts coming under all the window sills. And really it hadn't got any serious level of insulation. So I increased the insulation in the roof. I managed to insulate under the floor, and I replaced all the doors and windows, which made a massive difference. I also installed a new gas boiler at the time, and I also built an extension onto it, which actually acts as an art studio / wet clothes room and everything else. And that is a very modern, highly insulated room that can be heated with a very small amount of energy. So one end of it is very, very efficient. The picture you're looking at shows the air source pump that I recently had installed, because 9 years after I bought it, I decided that I wanted to go greener, as it were. And my motive really was environmental. And I wanted to see how far I could push it to make the house as environmental as possible. And so I went for a, can you find the photograph of the house with the solar panels on?
Yep.
Yeah, so that was the first one. So I decided to go for a whole system approach. And a lot of people will want to know about payback period on investment and all the rest of it. But actually, I didn't consider that to be an issue or to be relevant. I was fortunate enough to have enough money in the bank to do this. And of course, at the moment, money in the bank is earning absolutely nothing at all. And I felt that my money would be far better used generating energy for my house and for the grid. So I put on a solar panel system, which is an 8 kilowatt system, which is more than a house like this would require, but was very happy that any extra would be going into the grid. And unfortunately, I don't yet know what the feed-in tariff payment's going to be, because they only pay once a year, and I only registered it with them last February, so I haven't had a full year, so I don't quite know all the figures yet. Anyway, those are the solar panels. As you can see, snowy day, doing absolutely nothing at all, but snowy days are very rare. So can we move on to something else? Okay, that's just, I'll just mention that very briefly. My studio was heated with that electric radiator and one that was about 3 times the size. The one 3 times the size I never needed, and it was taken out, but I kept that one because I was quite nervous about the whole process. And so I told the installers of the air source pump system to leave that just in case. It was entirely unfounded. It's never been needed and hasn't been turned on for 1.5 years. That is showing the comment about increasing the size of the radiators. So yes, I did have to change all the radiators in the house to double size convecting radiators. And that is the largest one in the whole house, which is heating my studio, and is perfectly adequate. So that just references that point. We on to another one. And that is actually my studio. The point is that's the largest volume of air in the entire house, and it is heated more than comfortably by that one single radiator.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. The wood burning stove, again, I put that in 9 years ago, 10 years ago when I moved here. Since I had the air source pump put in and the new system put in, sadly, it never gets used, except on the odd day when a crowd of very wet fell walkers come into the house, maybe in sort of September when the heating's not really on. And therefore, it's still here, but actually it's now effectively redundant.
Okay, I'm just going to go back to the beginning of the slides because we missed some of those early ones.
Can we have the picture of the plant in the garage?
So I think I failed to put that one on my slideshow, so I'm just going to screen share it. I've got it open separately.
I just want to show what actually, there we go, that's the one. So the air source pump that you saw on the outside of the house, this is the works on the inside of the house. The tall stack is the other half of the heat exchange system, and the top part of that is the hot water boiler. Okay, and there is more than enough hot water. When the house is full of friends and they've all come off the fells and they all want showers, it's not a problem at all. And the house is constantly comfortably warm. I haven't actually had the radiators on in the bedrooms since I installed this. I have to say the one thing I did have to do, which I hadn't already done, was put cavity wall insulation in. So that added about £1,000 to the scheme. But since then, I've not used a radiator in any of the 3 bedrooms, and the house is just all incredibly warm and comfortable. You can see to the left there is the battery that I had installed. Above the battery are the inverters that convert the electricity from the solar panels. And also in the garage, which you can't just see, there is also a car charging point. So that's what I had installed. And I'm guessing that you probably want to know some figures. I say, for me, the payback period wasn't relevant because, as I say, I was fortunate enough to have enough money. But I'm guessing the figures that I can give you that are relevant, the whole system cost me around £30,000, for which I got the solar panels, the battery, the air source pump, the car charging point, the new radiators, and obviously the installation and everything else. The installation was very painless. The company who I used, who were in Halifax, did absolutely everything. They contacted the energy company, they contacted the National Grid, and all the people that they needed to speak to get permissions to do it. I didn't have to do a thing. It couldn't have been more painless if it had tried. So what is it costing me? Well, before I had gas and I had electricity, and I probably was paying about £45 a month for each. Therefore, that came to about £90 a month energy bill for the house. Since I've had this installed, obviously I don't have a gas bill any longer, but I do have an increased electricity bill, which at the moment is running around £61 a month, my direct debit, and it's perhaps not quite balanced out yet. But you have to bear in mind, within that £61 a month, I'm actually running my car. And when I had a petrol car, I would be putting about £100 a month of fuel into that. So that also represents an incredibly good saving for me. So I'm running my house and my car for about £61 a month. There's also the renewable energy payment incentive, which currently is £1,200 a year for 7 years. And there will be on top of it, which I don't know what it's going to be yet, will be the feed-in tariff. Also, another thing which is incredibly important to me is, frankly, the feel-good factor. I kind of want to live in a world where quality of life is much more important than standard of living. And this just makes me feel really good. And essentially, I sleep a lot better at night knowing that I've done everything I possibly can. The other thing is, having done it, my neighbors go, "So how is it working?" Two of my neighbors, well, one of my neighbors have already installed a system since I did this because they were so impressed. And I rang them today and they went, "Yep, we couldn't be happier." And another neighbor is going to do it. So the ripple effect of actually having done this, again, it's working. So you're speaking to, or I'm speaking as a very happy person, and that's essentially all I've got to say.
Great, thank you very much, Hugh. I'm just noticing on the Q&A, there's several questions I think are targeted to you, Hugh. So perhaps if you could find the Q&A button, you could maybe have a look at those questions. And if you can, if you click type an answer, and you can maybe start responding to some people. Otherwise, we can do it verbally at the end. Okay, lovely. While Hugh's looking at that, I'm going to hand over to David Hill, who, as I said, is an installer of heat pumps. And just to pick up on Jessica's point about making sure your installer is trustworthy and he's not just trying to sell you something. David doesn't work in Cumbria. He works down in Nottingham, so he's not here as a sales pitch. This is impartial advice from his long experience in this area. So I'm going to hand over to David now.
Sorry, Molly, I just had to get myself unmuted there.
It's okay.
Right, let's see if we can get this presentation working. Okay,
No,
can
we
I
can see,
repeat
that's
the
fine.
presentation? Molly?
Yes, we can see that, that's fine.
Brilliant. Okay, so heat pumps, is it right for me? Well, I'm really pleased with some of the information that Jessica's come from her survey. I'm bowled over by Hugh and his positive comments about heat pumps and having a low energy house and having a holistic approach to renewable energy. And it'll all be backed up with what I'm about to tell you. Now, I always show people this slide. If we're a smart human race, then that object, the sun, will give us all the energy we need for everything we ever will use. Now, why should you bother listening to me? I've been involved with renewable energy since 1999, both on a commercial and a domestic scale. I've built over 5,000 homes. It's what I specialized in for 30 years. 7 of those were self-builds to keep me busy in my spare time. 2009, set up Carbon Legacy, renewable installation company and consultancy. We do all the renewable resources. We used to do biomass boilers and solar hot water too, but gave them up for reasons I haven't got time for now. We've even been doing battery storage since 2012. We've got over 1,500 successful installations, domestic and commercial. And unlike most installers, everything we've done is monitored, either in huge detail or even if it's just annual energy usage. But today I'm here as an independent advice source, not to sell you any boxes. We don't sell boxes, we only give advice. So the agenda. It's a very big and complex subject. You will be over fussed, I'm sure. It will take a lot of research on your part. I will try and start you off in the right direction today, like why you should fit a heat pump. Is your house suitable? What should you do to find out more? How do you find an installer? What should that installer do so that you know they're a good installer? What heat pump should you choose? I want to talk to you very briefly about efficiency, why it's measured very differently for a heat pump, some things to be aware of, how to choose between an air source and a ground source, and that's a talk in itself, so I'm going to fly with that one. Very quickly about what limited grants are available and what the future of grants is going to be, and then some quick examples of what real people, our customers, have achieved, and I can only got time for 3 of those. So I often get asked, can I fit a heat pump to any type and age of house? The simple answer is yes, but the right answer is, would I recommend it for all houses? And the answer is no, I would not. So Mark, you're right. Hugh, you're right. Why use a heat pump? It can and will reduce running costs in most cases. It will greatly increase comfort levels, again in most cases. It is a fantastic way to reduce carbon emissions, which I can't explain to you at great length now. It will increase the value of your house. Agents are taking it as a positive step in most cases where it's been properly done. The government thinks you should because they realise it's the biggest single thing they can do to decarbonise our country. And bugger me if they didn't launch this 2 billion green homes grant, which has got the world buzzing. But of course, they've got no idea how it's going to be delivered. They reckon we need 44,000 installers to do it. And guess what? There's only 900 across the UK. So a big, silly ask, really. So what homes are suitable? And the easy ones are new build or recently built homes, or if you're going to do a passive house or a very super insulated house, the answer is always yes to a heat pump. But you will need high levels of insulation to get that heat loss small. Then you can have a small heat pump, which costs you only a small amount of money to install. You'll have cheaper running costs forever. And you will also usually on new builds have the choice of air source or ground source. And always, always, always if you're building new, go for underfloor heating. Again, I haven't got the time to explain why, but it's the right way to go. You will always have big savings compared to any other type of heating system, whether it be LPG, gas, oil, or whatever, or direct electric. And you will have low carbon emissions. And that low carbon emissions is only going to get better as we decarbonise our electricity supply in the UK. We're 40% of the way there already. Questionable homes. So any house that has a minimal amount of insulation, it's going to have a significant heat loss because of that lack of insulation. If you're on mains gas, then you have to think about this question very carefully, whether it's right for your house or not. And your first thought should always be fabric first. Think about insulation first. Spend your money on insulation. It will reduce your heating cost no matter what your heating system is. So insulation, insulation, insulation. Spend your money there first before you do anything else. And you must look at your loft, your windows, your walls, your floors. So in an old house like this, put 400 mil of fiberglass in the loft. It costs a few £100. You'll get your money back in a couple of years. Simplest and most effective thing you can do. If you do have to replace the windows, don't double glaze them, triple glaze them. They are twice as good as double glazing for 10% more money. There are grants available for insulation and for heat pumps. We'll look at those later. You'll often be limited in your choice because of external space, so you may end up only having the choice of an air source heat pump. And very importantly, and I'm sad I've not seen it mentioned yet today, about radiator upgrades. You will have to upgrade your radiators in an older house. Absolutely 100% guaranteed. The key question is how many do you have to replace to keep your heat pump running efficiently? And nobody's explained this to you yet, but a heat pump likes to output at low temperatures. A boiler kicks out at 70 to 80 degrees. A heat pump is most efficient at 35. If you have to run it up to 50, then you're reducing your efficiency and increasing your running costs. And often a lot of people say to me, well, if my house is going to be so difficult and so expensive to sort out, should I just wait until mains gas gets replaced with hydrogen? And that is a strategy. And certainly it's good for you to modernize your boiler and replace it with a brand new one. That will all help. How much is hydrogen going to cost us in the future in our mains? We haven't got a bloody clue, is the honest answer. So I'm afraid we'll have to leave the jury out on that one. Now here's a picture of a good Keswick house, solid stone construction, no cavities, not a glimmer of insulation, maybe a little bit in the loft if we're lucky. And I can see someone's added a bit of secondary glazing on the bigger windows. This is the most difficult house to heat with a heat pump. You're going to have a huge heat loss. If you're on mains gas, my advice is stay on mains gas. Just fit that new boiler. It may still be viable to look at a heat pump if you're on something horrible like LPG or direct electric heaters, and I'll show you an example of that later. Do consider insulation. Look at all the things I've talked about. Look at the grants. And unfortunately, some of our customers come to the conclusion with an old house like this, they should just sell up and have something newer. So what can you do now to find out whether it's the right thing for you to do? First thing, if you haven't got one already, is have a new EPC done. That's an energy performance certificate. It'll cost you £50 or £60 to do, and it needs to be less than 2 years old anyway to use it for RHI purposes to get the grant. Take advice. Talk to Tina, talk to Molly, talk to that organisation that they're involved with. They're a great source of information, and there's more online. Consider the grants that are available, and yes, you are being rushed because the government has stuck a bloody time limit of it of end of March 22 for both the Green Homes grant and the Renewable Heating Incentive, or the RHI. The only good news for you is they are being pushed to reconsider those dates, and I suspect they will get extended. You must plan a budget, find out how much you think you can afford to spend, carry out the insulation upgrades first, then get your quote for your heat pump, and very importantly, choose a good installer, because if you don't, you will come a cropper, and we have come across many sad cases where we've been pulled in to try and fix things. Now, finding an installer, 2 simple things to do to start off with is start with the MCS registered database of installers. You'll find it online. The MCS is the Microgeneration Certification Scheme, government managed process. It's very, very useful to you and a great place to start. There are some installers such as Nibi of Sweden who keep a VIP installers list. We're a VIP installer. Another good place to start. They have to have a lot of experience to get on those lists. Look for relevant experience, and for goodness sake, keep away from some new startup marketing company that's just trying to sell you a box through some other installer who will rip you off good and proper. Always go for at least 2 or 3 quotes. But do remember, when you're asking for quotes, there's a hell of a lot of work involved in doing a full MCS certified viability assessment. It's literally 2 days, man days of work, or person days, I should say. Now, vetting the installer, do not accept telephone quotes. They cannot estimate your heat loss over the phone or the age of your house. You need to ask for a full measured survey, unless you happen to have a newish house and you've got a full set of plans and a SAP. SAP is another more detailed energy analysis of a new house. Gather as much information together before you see your installer, so your electricity and gas bills, or your oil bills, or whatever, any plans you've got of the house, your up-to-date EPC, details of the insulation that you know about that are in your house already, and any plans that you've got to upgrade your insulation. Do ask for a full MCS heat loss calculation. That means the surveyor has to go around room by room, measure the size of your windows, look at the type of glazing, look at the areas of wall, areas of external doors, look at the insulation in your loft. It's a very detailed process, and it takes a long time to build up that model, but it's the only way to be relatively accurate. Make sure they look at the site constraints of your house and your location. You know, if you're 300 meters up a mountain, very exposed to the wind, that all greatly affects your heat loss and must be built into the model. They need to look at where the heat pump will be sited, how to remove your old boiler, what radiator upgrades you need, pipe routes, power supply, and you will need a new hot water tank for a heat pump. A heat pump will not work with an existing hot water tank. And of course, you may not have one if you've got a gas combi boiler. So you've got to find space for it. See if they mention getting connection approval from the DNO, that's the people who run the grid. You do have to have an approval, prior approval to a heat pump connection. If the DNO don't like it, they can come back and turn it off. You need to get them to estimate for you the eligible grants that you can get and show how they calculated it to make sure they're not bending the rules, and get it all in writing and check any conditions. So there's quite a lot to do to make sure your installer's telling you the right things. Equipment and warranties. So you should be looking at your installer giving you at least 2 to 3 years on parts and labor. Preferably that should be insurance backed. That's a basic requirement for an MCS installer. Some manufacturers will give you 7 years on the main items of the kit, the heat pump and the buffer tanks and stuff. If you buy the right hot water tank with a stainless steel lining, you can get 25 years guarantee on that. Keep away from copper tanks, they give up eventually. Avoid Chinese branded heat pumps. There are a few companies out there who don't make anything. They just market the box and stick their label on it. Go for a reputable heat pump manufacturer. Go for the big names. Nibi, the biggest in Europe, makes over 200,000 heat pumps a year. Sells throughout Europe and now is moving outside Europe. Stiebel Eltron, a big German company. Worcester Bosch, Wiesmann, another excellent German company. Daikin. There are some excellent makes out there. Make sure your heat pump installer is being straight with you about the design flow temperature, because the higher that temperature, then the more inefficient the heat pump will be. Make sure they give you a full list of the radiator upgrades, sizes, and it's often cheaper for you to get your local plumber to change those radiators. Now, efficiency. You'll be used to hearing gas boilers, oh, it's 70, 80, 90% efficient. It doesn't work like that with a heat pump. If you put 1 kilowatt hour of gas into a boiler, at best you'll get 90% of that energy out as heat. The rest of it goes up the flue. A heat pump, you put 1 kilowatt hour of electricity in, and you'll get 3.5 or 4.5 units of heat out of it, because it's stealing heat from the air or from the ground. And they call that efficiency the SCOP, or the seasonal coefficient performance. And that's a manufacturer's figure that the MCS people have to check and prove. And it's the average efficiency across a year. Yeah, so it's the really useful number. Get the installer to prove the SCOP that you're going to have in your system. As I say, the lower the flow temperature, say going into an underfloor heating system at 35, will give you the highest efficiency levels. 55 and above, rejected. Your heat pump could be as poor as 2.8 SCOP. And that SCOP greatly affects your running costs, and the government will reward you for a higher SCOP number because they know it means more efficiency, less electricity, and less carbon emissions. Get the installer to prove that your system will output at the design temperature. I'm not sure what it is for Cumbria, but down here it's -3.5. So some heat pumps will not produce enough energy for your heat loss. Even though it says 12 on the box, it might only give you 10 at the design heat temperature. So be careful. And ask for a comparison of existing running costs to the proposed running costs so that you understand the savings you are likely to make. Beware the inexperienced salesperson. I mean, that applies to all things in life. Beware COPs below 3.5. Beware them not be willing to put everything in writing. There's always a reason. Beware companies who want an early sign up before they'll do lots of work. If you like the company and they ask you for a design fee, especially the small companies, be willing to pay that couple of £100 to get them to spend that extra day convincing you and doing all the numbers. It's worth it. Some of the newer heat pumps, such as the ones from NEBI, have built-in heat meters and electricity meters, so you can actually calculate yourself your efficiency levels at the end of the year. We do that in some of our existing installations through very complex things, but now the new heat pumps have it built in. And here's a killer. When people get a new heating system and they think it's going to be super green, they think, oh, I can heat my house 24/7 now, and I'm going to have cheap bills forever. But be careful, your expectations may be a lot greater than what has been modeled. Your old heating system, you might have only had it on for 2 or 4 hours a day, where you start leaving it on for 24 hours a day, you will have a large bill. And every degree increase in temperature in your house costs you about 10% extra in running costs. So don't do what some customers of ours have done, is turn the heating up to 23 and think it's marvelous and run around in their shorts and t-shirt and say, why is my heating bill, David, a third bigger than you said it would be? So be aware. Air source or ground source. Most existing homes will end up with air source, again for space and cost issues. New builds with very low heat loss refurbishment homes, you can look at ground source. We've even built some homes where the heat collector has gone into the foundation trench because the heat loss of the house has been so small. So we've done some really crazy, marvelous things that reduce costs. Again, the heat pump must have an indoor hot water tank and put the buffer tank in there too. And if an installer says you don't need a buffer tank, then ask somebody who understands that system, preferably the manufacturer, to confirm that. Ground source heat pumps are more efficient. I'm afraid that's a basic fact of life because they've got a constant source of heat. So it doesn't matter what the weather's doing outside. They are more reliable and they will last longer. I've got heat pumps that are over 20 years old now. So they are great stuff if you can afford it. You've seen pictures of air source heat pump tonight. There's another picture of one nice neat installation of a NEBI outside a new build house, 12 kilowatt output unit. The plant room for a ground source, you need quite a lot of space, big fridge freezer heat pump size box, hot water tank in the middle, a buffer tank to the left, and then that's a whole house ventilation system, which we're not here to talk about tonight. If you're doing a ground system, you'll be collecting heat from trenches. This is a heat collector pipe. People can never understand how a pipe buried only 1 metre and a bit down in the ground can collect enough energy for their houses, but with enough trenches and the right heat pump, you can. Oops, went one too far. How do I go back? There we go. Boreholes are often an overlooked excellent way to collect heat from the ground. And it looks like a lot of space you need for all the machines and kit to drill the holes. But once it's done, all you're left with is that little picture on the right, 2 pipes sticking out the ground. They'll be trenched back into the house, into the heat pump. So it's got a very low ground impact. So we've even used boreholes on existing houses, and the only space we had was a double car parking bay, and we did it. So don't always be put off that boreholes aren't the right solution. Now, grants. We've got this daft Green Homes grant, which most householders will only be able to get £5,000 out of it and put it towards their heat pump. If you're on benefits, you can get up to 10 grand towards your cost of installation. But remember, that cost is limited to 75% of your total cost. The renewable heat incentive is a very generous subsidy pot. And if you can, if you've got the time, do look at it. It's paid over 7 years, as you explained. The amount of grant you can get is anywhere between £5,000 and £14,000. You have to cash flow it. You'll get that money back over the first 7 years, whereas the Green Homes grant is a one-off cash payment that goes to the installer. Ground source heat pumps, the grants are far more generous. The government love them because it's so efficient and robust. And so the grants will go anywhere between £10,000 and £36,000. But a big drawback has been mentioned. Those 2 grant pots, in theory, will disappear by March 22. A lot of lobbying is going on. Fingers crossed, both those pots of money will be extended beyond March 22. We don't know yet, because the thing they've been consulting on, this low carbon heating grant, is £4,000 proposed per unit, per home. It's just bonkers, and it's not enough money to encourage people to get on with a heat pump. Now, costs of a heat pump. Oh, horribly variable. So many things to consider. I've given you some rough ideas here. Air source heat pump, £10,000, £17,000, maybe even more for a very large house. Don't forget your radiator upgrades. You'll always need something. Ground source heat pumps, lots more money, but again, lots of positive reasons and lots more RHI grant available. And do remember, with a ground source, there will be some trenching and making good costs and possible radiator upgrades. So a very difficult thing to estimate for you. And the only way to find out is to do the research and get the quotes. So please make the right choice, base it on good research, base it on good installers' prices that you've got. And as Hugh's pointed out, the choice is not always about payback and money. Sometimes it's about comfort, sometimes it's about climate change, sometimes it's about really long-term cost savings. And some people accept it's about future-proofing their home, because oil and gas is going to run out and hydrogen may or may not work. We don't really know yet. So at least make an informed choice. So some examples to finish off with. So here's that 1930s cottage. No wall insulation. 157 square meters, so sort of a small 4-bed house. We persuaded the owners to double up in the loft. Their double glazing was quite recent, so that didn't get changed. They didn't want any more disruptions, so that was all they did. But they had, shockingly, electric storage heaters that were costing them an absolute fortune, nearly £3,000 a year to run, and they were spending £1,000 a year on logs because they had a log burner. Their heat loss was quite high, and the 13.86 kilowatts won't mean much to you, but just look at that figure next to it, 88 watts a square meter. Remember that one. A big old Victorian house might be as high as 100 to 110 watts a square meter. Passive house is down at 10, 15 watts a square meter. So there's huge differences to be made on what insulation you put into a home. The MCS model for this house estimated 32,500 kilowatt hours of heat was needed. The heat pump had to be designed to run at 50, so the Scott was 3.5. The 16 kilowatt heat pump shows running costs of £804 a year. So bear that in mind. You look at the install cost of £16,000, but because they had no radiators and no pipe work, they had to have a complete new heat distribution system costing over £7,000. Now you add all that together, you chuck in the government subsidy of £11,000, and over 7 years, they'll end up £1,644 better off. So a positive story, even for an older house that you might have thought was not the way to go for a heat pump. Now here's one that might shock you. A 1960s bungalow, 145 square meters, moderately well insulated, bit of insulation in the cavity, got them to top up the loft again. They had an old gas boiler costing them £1,000 a year. Their heat loss was 10 kilowatts or 70 something watts per square meter. Their estimate of energy usage was 23,000, flow temperature again of 50. Air source heat pump was going to cost them £928 a year to run in this house. So not a great saving over gas. Their install cost was nearly £18,000 plus £1,500 of new radiators. The RHI grant, £11,000. So their net position after 7 years is a miserable minus £5,500. So you would not do that house with an air source heat pump for money reasons. They only did it for the environmental reasons. Now, just to finish off with, 2 self-builds we organised and have built next door here to the office, and we've done lots of other new builds as well. I show you these because I've got so much data on them. Built in 2018. Big houses. The one I'm going to talk to you about was 280 square metres, a big 5-bed house, tiny heat loss, 23 watts per square metre. It has a SAP score of an A, 107, compared to some of those houses we looked at before, which are E's and F's and what have you. They're 2020, all energy consumption. That's every kilowatt of energy that had to go into that house for heating, hot water, lighting, cooking, sockets, TVs, you name it, everything came out of that 11,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. And of that, they only had to import 4,000 kilowatt hours. That's what they bought from the grid. So their all energy cost last year was £715 when they were paying 16p a kilowatt hour for the electricity. But importantly, they exported 4,500 kilowatt hours of electricity because they'd filled their roof with PV panels on the back. And in 2021, because they're moving on to the Tesla energy plan, where you buy electricity at 11p and you sell electricity to the grid at 11p per kilowatt hour, their bill will go down to minus £4.41. So that's a whole house energy. The house will be earning them money. I know it's only £4, but they're getting their house run for free. So quite amazing stuff. Thank you very much, Molly.
Thank you, David. That's great. And we'll take the questions at the end. So I'm now going to launch our second poll. So this one has got a few more questions, and we're wanting to understand, as well as how you feel about heat pumps, about kind of what kind of support you think might help you if you were wanting to install a heat pump in your house, and how much you'd be prepared to pay for that kind of support. So this will help inform how we shape our services going forward. So I'm going to launch the second poll now. I'll just give it a minute or so for people to go through that, because as I said, there's a few more questions than the first time. Is that poll working okay? So it's not showing up any votes yet for me. Could somebody put a comment in the chat?
Yeah, I'm just answering questions in the chat box.
Oh, yes, someone's just voted. Yeah, they're coming in now. That's great. Wonderful. Okay, we've got 10 responses, going up a bit. I'd encourage you, if you can respond, that really helps to let us know how to target our support in the next stages. Okay, it's looking like people's confidence has improved slightly as a result of this webinar, which is good. Okay, I'm going to give it another 10 seconds and then I'm going to close the poll and I will share the results with you. All right, someone's told me that there's lots of questions before we submit, so that it only happens when you've done all of them. Okay, I just need to be patient. Okay, wonderful. Right, I'm going to close the poll now because it looks like, oh, just got a couple more in. 5 more seconds then. Okay, wonderful. I'm going to end it now and I'll show people the results. Okay, so on the question 1, which is a repeat of the question that we had at the beginning, it looks like people's confidence has increased to reasonably confident now, which is the good thing. Obviously, you've still got, most of you have still got questions unanswered. So in the next slide, I'll show you some follow-up options we've got for you to increase your confidence even further. Would you be interested in visiting a home that's had a heat pump installed? Most of you would. So we'll look at that for the future and when COVID allows to see whether we can get some visits arranged. Do you plan to install a heat pump? So majority of people, yes, they are, by a small majority, and around 10 to 25,000 they'd be prepared to spend on the retrofitting. Barriers, fair few, lack of trusted installers is a big one. Yeah, that rings true with other things we've heard. Would you welcome professional support to help you identify what you need to do and funding opportunities? So the majority is yes, and up to around £500 on that. Would you welcome support for people to oversee the installation, help you find the right installers? And again, the majority is yes, and around £500, up to £500. So that's really helpful. Thank you very much for doing that. I'm going to close this now. Okay, and then I'm just going to give you a few. Just bear with me for a second. Okay, so things that you can do now if you want to find out more information. There's website and information on our website about heat pumps. It's under the For Your Home tab and renewables for electricity and heating. And also, as I said, Jessica's report will be going up on our website, and I think we can probably email it to you directly if you request it. Our energy team offer advice calls. You can either have a short free advice call if it's just a quick question that they can answer easily, or you can book a longer and more in-depth conversation. There is a charge for that. You can find out information about that again on the website, or there's the phone number or email address you can use to contact the energy team. The energy team, our CAFS energy team, we also offer a building audit service, which is called the Home Retrofit Planner. So again, this is a paid for service, and this is to look at your home and to advise what measures are right for your home. Finally, if you wouldn't mind for me, I'm just going to quickly add 2 links into the chat. If I can find that. Oh, I'm going to stop screen sharing to do that. So oh, sorry, excuse me. So I've just put 2 links into the chat. The first one is for our feedback form. If you wouldn't mind filling that in for us, that really helps us to make our webinars better in the future from the feedback you give us. And also just to highlight the fact that although this particular webinar was funded by South Lakeland District Council, we are a charity, and if you would like to donate, if you're able to donate, we would really appreciate your donations, and that helps to build the service and the information we can provide. So that's enough for me. Thank you very much for listening. We're going to now look at the Q&A questions. So I think people have been answering some of these as we've been going through. So I'm just going to read out the ones that's still in the Q&A box. If you have put a specific question in the chat that you really want us to answer, if you could paste that into the Q&A box, that would make sure we don't miss it. And I'll have a quick look through the chat after I've gone through these ones as well. Okay, so we have a question here from Amy that says, could you expand on why large farmhouses might not be suitable? Would they be suitable post retrofit? I'm interested as they're often off-grid, so can reduce CO2 emissions considerably if successful. So I think perhaps this was something that maybe Mark mentioned in his talk. So David, do you want to answer that from based on what you were saying on your
Yes.
presentation?
If you insulate well any building and make its heat loss small, and you might install underfloor heating as part of that process, then you can have a heat pump, whether it be a ground or an air source for your large farmhouses. No problem at all, been involved in many of those. So yes, it is possible, but remember, fabric first, insulate, 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 and think about your heat distribution system.
Great, thank you. The next one was, I think this was directed at Hugh, do you pay a standing charge for your gas?
I don't have gas anymore, so no.
Okay, lovely. Okay, the next question, high insulation needs to consider thermal bridging. How do you manage this? Now, perhaps Tina, do you want to come in on this one?
Okay, yes, I'll just appear. If I can sorry, I can't seem to.
That's okay, we can just listen to you.
Listen. Yes, it's a really good point. Until traditionally, a lot of these government-funded schemes for insulation tend to just think wall or loft or floor. But actually, once you've done all of that, you find that you've got these little gaps where the wall insulation doesn't quite meet the loft insulation, or it doesn't quite meet the floor insulation. And that's where getting some proper advice and proper design work done comes into its own, because you will get a much better quality result if you literally wrap the whole house and you think about the junctions between the wall, the floor and the roof. And where you do have these cold bits where you've got a gap in the insulation, you can get condensation and mold. So for a better quality result, it is a good idea to really think about the cold bridges, try and minimize them wherever possible. And to do that, you would be looking to get advice, could be from an architect. It's the sort of thing that the CAF's whole house plan can touch on. And of course, you'd need to find building professionals who are prepared to do the work correctly and as requested. So the design is really important.
Thank you,
Can I
Tina.
just add to that, please, Molly?
Yeah.
If you are, for instance, to build a new house today, the building regulations would demand that it had an air pressure test, which tests how leaky that house is to drafts. If you met the building standard today, you would hit a figure of 5. If you were to build a passive house, you'd be down at 1 or less. The difference that would make in your running costs, no matter what you heat it with, would be 50%. So air tightness and drafts are critical in a house and make a massive difference to your heat losses. And I didn't have time to talk about it before, but listen to Tina, cold bridges, drafts, fix them where you can.
Thank you, David. Okay, next question from Viv. Why is ground source heat pump so much more expensive? Is it the digger hire?
I wish it wasn't just a digger hire. You have a lot more complex kit with a ground source heat pump, both in the house and in the ground, and it'll vary astronomically. So give you a clue, with a super duper efficient house with a collector into the foundation trench, and that's all the collection we would need, then the ground part might only cost a couple of £1,000. But on a big house that can't do that, because it's an existing farm or whatever, farmhouse or a big building, but you're going to put collecting trenches into the field, you might have 6 50-metre long trenches, and you might be spending 15, 18, 20,000 pounds on those ground collectors. So there can be a huge amount of money involved in the ground. And yes, there is more money to spend on the kit that goes in the house as well.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Next question, rough guide to sizing a heat pump. output kilowatts estimated from heat demand, kilowatt hour per annum?
Nope.
Is that a question you can answer?
Nope. There is no answer. You can't do rough numbers for a heat pump. Unlike a boiler, if a plumber turns up to your house and he says, "Oh, you've got a 3-bed semi, it's about 100 square meters. Oh, well, you know, if I put a 30 kilowatt in, you'll be fine." Even though your heat loss might be 10, might be 15, might be 20 kilowatts. He doesn't know. He doesn't care. He just puts a big boiler in that'll definitely deliver enough heat. A heat pump, you size it to within a kilowatt or 2 of the actual design heat loss. So no, there is no rough guide at all.
Okay, thank you. The next one isn't a question but a statement, saying that not intending any criticism of anybody, but it's still looking like technology that suits those with plenty of disposable income, even with grants out of the reach of those who might benefit most. Yeah, completely agree. The grants available aren't sufficient to be able to make this affordable for people that don't have lots of savings.
Yeah, absolutely right. I wish I could fix it for you, but I can't.
Maybe at some point it will be fixed, who knows? Okay, next one from Debbie Stevens. This is a long question. We are converting a Lakeland barn into a 2-bedroom forever home and want to install a water borehole and solar PV, and wonder whether a ground source heat pump will be possible from the same borehole. We have an acre of land and a small beck running alongside the property. And a question, I'm not sure whether this is a serious question or not, but when can David come around to advise us? And presumably she can contact you via your website, Carbon Legacy, if she really wants you to come out from Nottingham. But perhaps if you could just some advice online here.
A long answer, unfortunately. I suggest, Debbie, give me a ring in the office and I'll talk you through all the options that you'll have. Good news is it's only a small home, so its heat loss won't be huge if you're going to well insulate it. So you've got lots of options, but no simple answer to what you've said.
Okay, wonderful. David, would you mind messaging Debbie with your phone number, or just put your website address in the chat so she can find you? Okay, next question. Simon and Sally, we would like to stop burning stuff and ditch gas. Has David got any thoughts on swapping out a gas boiler for an electric combi when combined with solar and battery storage? We have realised from this webinar that we have no room for an air source heat pump system. Yes, me too. Take up a lot of space.
Okay, direct electric heating is always the last place to go. An electric combi boiler is just that. 1 kilowatt electricity in, 1 kilowatt of heat out. Electricity is very expensive relative to all other fuels. So unless you're multiplying the use of that electricity up with a heat pump, electric heating is not the way to go. Don't ditch gas if it's too expensive for you. Just to go heat pump, or you can't physically do it, then stick with gas. Put a new boiler in if that's what you need to do to make it a bit more efficient. But don't go electric. You will regret it big time in running costs.
Great, thank you. David, what is your view on 2-stage stroke high temp air source heat pumps?
There are some very interesting heat pumps coming this year and next, which are changing refrigerants, which are able to go to much higher temperatures. Now, what I cannot get those manufacturers to do yet is tell me how efficient they are at those higher flow temperatures. So ask me that question again in a few months' time and I might know the answer, but not yet.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Simon. Are heat pump installs going to be the next solar panels industry for the charlatans to jump into?
In case you've not noticed, Simon, they're already here, the charlatans. They've been around for the last, well, since the RHI started. And there were people who were saying, we'll fit you a heat pump for free and we'll take your RHI payments, and all sorts of nonsense went on, just like the solar panel industry. There's still a few of them left. I know some of them are still being investigated and pursued through the courts, but they just go, you know, they make themselves go bust and turn up with a new name next week. It's shocking what goes on. So be very careful with who you turn to.
Thank you. Next one, what sort of ground conditions would prohibit or make too costly borehole ground source?
None actually. Hard rock is brilliant for a ground source heat pump. If you drill it, you can't dig it, but you'll certainly be able to drill it. And boreholes are a very sensible economic solution sometimes. Soft ground, wet ground is brilliant for trench collectors. The wetter the ground, the better. So dry, sandy ground is probably the worst for a ground collector because it doesn't conduct the heat that well, but it's still possible. You know, I did an office building back in 2000 which had 30 boreholes on Nottingham dry sandstone, and it worked fine. It just means you have more holes and you have to spend more money on your heat collector.
Okay, thank you. Would it make sense to add an air source heat pump to put heat into a biomass boiler heat store?
Okay, now we used to do quite a bit of biomass. We went off it in the end because it required so much maintenance. You're ending up spending up so much money on parts and replacement bits. And people soon got tired of having to look after biomass boilers. So we pulled away from it in the end, and then the subsidies changed as well, and people weren't as excited about it anymore. So if you've already got a biomass boiler, why do you want to go to the trouble of an air source heat pump? Because then you're going to be running two systems, and you're going to have to maintain them both. I would suggest you make a choice. You decide which do you want. Do you want convenience and simplicity with an air source, or do you want to continue to upkeep and look after your biomass boiler? Have a hard think.
Okay, Mark, I noticed you were shaking your head there. Was there anything you wanted to add, or did you just agree with David's? You're on mute.
Yeah, my comment will be why pay the capital cost of two systems where you're trying to do the same job. So yeah, I think David's got it right. You know, particularly with a new build or where you're upgrading your installation, I would definitely support the idea that you choose one or the other system.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question. I live in a bungalow with rooms in the roof and polystyrene insulation between the rafters where I can see. Also a sealed loft space. Do I need to remove the loft? Sorry, do I need to remove the roof to insulate properly as a first step? Should we move to Tina for this one? This sounds like a Tina question. Well, I'm sure David would know the answer as well.
I'm sure he would. And I think, you know, without actually seeing, it's a little bit difficult to say, but where you've got rooms in the roof and you're wanting to make it better insulated, it can be a little bit challenging, and you do need, it is a good idea to get some professional advice, really, because you can add insulation, and if you do it not quite in the right way or the right place or with the right product, you could actually trap moisture in those rafters. So I'd be a little bit wary of just giving you a do this, do that without actually seeing it. And if you've got, if it's reason, it depends what you're trying to do. If you're trying to make it super insulated because you want an air source heat pump to heat the whole house, then the chances are the existing loft insulation may not be enough, and you may need to do something properly. And if you need to re-roof, if your tiles are shot, then maybe insulating above them is an option. Otherwise, you're looking at insulating below, and have you got space? So there's lots of different questions, and I think the devil's in the detail with that one. Don't know if David, you'd like to add anything else to that.
No, well said, Tina. I mean, one little thing to remember, they've said polystyrene. The insulation value of polystyrene is very poor. It's really the same as fiberglass. So remember, if you're going to put 400 mil in your existing loft, and you've only got 50 mil of polystyrene in your existing room in the roofs, it's not a lot of use. You're going to have to do it properly. Take advice.
Okay, thank you. Next question. On boiler sizing, most plumbers will simply chuck in a 30 kilowatt combi because they don't actually have a clue, and they don't want to have a clue. And it'll be both oversized for heating and undersized for the hot water. Okay, so that was a comment rather than a question. Next one. I missed part of the presentation, so you may have covered this. I've had potential installers recommend high temperature air source heat pumps. These output at around 70 degrees C, they say. They claim they maintain efficiency by using a new type of condenser fluid. What are your views on this? I think you mentioned this earlier, did you, David?
All lies, I'm afraid. If you
Right.
can, I've only ever had one manufacturer who, through the back door, told me what their efficiency was when they were running at 65. So at 70, it'll be even worse. At 65 degrees, the Scott went down to 2.8. So that means you're having to put in an awful lot of electricity out to get the heat out that you need. So hang on, don't go for a high temperature heat pump until the numbers are all published and confirmed to be true by MCS. You'll see on the MCS website, they will only say up to 55 degrees flow.
Great, thank you. Next question. As we get more and cheaper renewables online and more vehicle to grid systems, I would hope electricity costs will reduce. Gas cannot be the answer. Okay, so that's another comment. And then finally, if you have an efficient gas boiler, can this be kept in combination with a heat pump in cold weather?
Do you want me to answer that one?
Yes, please.
Okay. If you've got an efficient gas boiler, why are you going to spend all that money for a very, very, very small, if any, running cost saving? Today, I wouldn't bother doing it. And fingers crossed, we'll decarbonise our mains gas supply in the future. But, you know, a new modern efficient boiler on gas, paying only 3.5 pence per kilowatt hour for gas at the minute. It's impossible almost for a heat pump to compete with that running cost. So no, I wouldn't bother.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions in the Q&A, and we're drawing to an end now. I'm just going to quickly skim through the chat to see if there is anything else in there. So how far from the house can the trench be for a ground source heat pump?
Furthest we've gone was 80 metres.
Okay.
Could be further.
Okay. I'm just having a quick look through the chat. There was one question here from Esther. Is the boiler powered with the air source heat pump as well? I wonder whether she means...
I think she's confused here.
I don't know whether, Esther, perhaps you mean whether it's the heating and hot water, perhaps. I don't know whether you can maybe I'll answer that question instead, in case that's what Esther was after. But David, does it do your hot water as well as your heating?
Yes, it will.
Yeah. Do you use a battery to store your PV power and charge your car? So perhaps that was to Hugh, because Hugh mentioned your battery storage, didn't you?
Yes, is the answer to that. The PV charges the battery. The battery runs the air source pump. And if there's an imbalance, then it goes to the grid. I think that's the way it works.
Okay, thank you. Another one for you, Hugh. How did Hugh get 8 kilowatt PV certified? I thought the limit for a private install was 4 kilowatt.
Yeah, I think somebody answered that. It's down to your specific supply. And it was agreed with the electricity board that here, specifically, it was doable.
Yeah, we've had 12 kilowatts on a single phase connection to the grid. It all depends where you sit in the grid, how close you are to the substation, what's the strength of the grid in your area, and whether other people can use that export when you're exporting. So you just have to ask.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we are just past 8 o'clock. We said we finish at 8, and we've got no more open questions. So I think we will draw to a close. Thank you very much to our panelists for all your contributions. Thank you for the attendees. If you could fill out the feedback form for me with the link in the chat, that would be amazing. And we hope you'll be able to join us for future webinars. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks, Molly.